Now, back in East Africa, Kenya's capital will be hosting the 14th session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development later on in July. The event will bring together heads of state and government, ministers and other prominent players in the business world, civil society and even academia to tackle global trade and economic development issues. The quadrennial conference will also be a pretty unique opportunity to consider the most appropriate means of delivering on the post-2015 development agenda. It will also decide on UNCTAD's program of work. Now, one of the main goals over the next 5 years, at least in this part of the world, is setting up a fully functional continental free trade area. A big step towards that was achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh when 3 trade blocs agreed to form a free trade area. But where exactly do we go from here? Let's find out. Mohisa Kitui is the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. He's with me in studio tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, good evening.
2017 is a target that's been set for setting up this continental free trade area in Africa. Can we do it?
Yes and no. I was part of the team that was working on this recommendation for 2017. We wanted an ambitious time frame to try to make some progress. 2017 we can achieve certain important milestones in the process, but we cannot complete, at least not a Pan-African free trade area by 2017. But major steps will have been taken, I hope, by the end of 2017.
What are those quick wins that we can get between now and then?
A final agreement on common external tariff between the COMESA, EAC and SADC, the tripartite. Progress within the ECOWAS region and the Central African Customs Union on starting to interlock with the CFTA, with the tripartite, and making some progress for similar effects on the structure of their customs.
I mean, you've sat on both sides of the fence, both as a technocrat and also as a minister when you're Minister of Trade here in Kenya. Help us understand this. What usually is the problem in trying to get these diverse trade blocs to agree? Is it mostly a technical problem or is it mostly a political problem?
Both types of problems. For example, in East Africa, we have fairly low tariffs on consumer goods and substantially higher tariffs on industrial goods. No, we have low tariffs on capital goods, machinery, factory equipment, and capital inputs for production, and higher tariffs on consumer goods. Now, in Southern Africa, they have a similar structure, but they have higher industrial tariffs than us, mainly because South Africa has a history of state having used high tariffs to help industrialization. So in negotiating the tripartite between East African Community, COMESA and SADC, you find a situation where South African industry is not comfortable with lowering industrial tariffs to the level that is existing in East Africa and COMESA. So that's a technical thing about the sense of how competitive is the industry, how much they think they'll be vulnerable to the industries of the other countries in the area.
But surely, for the typical observer like myself, I'll probably say South Africa is the most industrialized economy in Africa.
It is the most industrialized economy, but its industrial sector is not the most competitive industrial sector in Africa. That's a different thing. This region, both through the history of structural adjustment and recent work, particularly in the negotiation of the East African Community and COMESA, has had much lower maximum applied tariffs than South Africa, than SADC. So indeed, South Africa is more industrialized than most of the rest of Africa, but its industry in a common environment is not necessarily more competitive than other industries in the region.
Right, even if they have a head start at the end of the day. Let's get back to East Africa though. I mean, we're seeing a lot of non-tariff barriers still in place within the EAC. For example, one of the longest that's been in place is a ban in Uganda on importing beef from Kenya, which has been around forever and ever. Given these issues that we still have to deal with at the regional economic bloc level, aren't we jumping the gun in some sense by trying to set up the CFTA?
I don't think so. First of all, okay, I mean, beef and dairy products into Uganda is a tariff barrier, it's not a non-tariff barrier. But you know, the thing is, we have challenges sometimes politically inspired, that some countries feel national security is a reason or an excuse to breach the word and spirit of what is agreed. Sometimes during harvesting season, Tanzania bans maize exports to Kenya. Sometimes Uganda stops milk from Kenya entering to Uganda. And many times Kenya stops sugar from Uganda entering Kenya.
Yes.
These are just decisions inspired by political correctness at home which are in breach of the word and spirit of the customs union. Now, having said that, there is no customs union that does not have problems. The European Union, which has been around for more than 40 years, still has problems. Well, Britain sometimes being reluctant to apply the provisions of the free movement of labor. So these are issues that will have to be dealt with from time to time. That's why you have dispute resolution mechanisms. That's why you push for greater political commitment, and it happens in every
with the EU example, I mean, yes. For example, you've got a fairly open common market for labor, but I still talk to CEOs around here who have issues getting Kenyan staff to move across the border into Tanzania. I mean, we're still struggling with very, very basic
I'm aware
things.
of that. I was involved a lot in negotiating about that. Tanzania has this historical, traditional sensitivity about Kenyan and increasingly now even Ugandan labor. But political will has to be built, and this is what the critical importance of political leadership. One of the main barriers to Kenyan trade with Tanzania sometimes is officers feigning ignorance about the rules, saying, oh, you are supposed to pay to get here. If that has been changed, I don't know. But pay, if it has been changed, we'll find a way of reimbursing you later. But it's a method of slowing down certain forms of trade. It has particularly applied to Kenyan vehicles taking tourists into Tanzania. So these are hurdles that you go through as countries learn to embrace the other and get over traditional biases and anxieties and uncertainties. But it is much worse in other areas. It's much worse in Central Africa. It's much worse between West and Central Africa. And these are the issues that technocrats and politicians have to work on all the time.
Speaking of those two particular areas, Central Africa, West Africa, how do we get them to plug in to the wider free trade area?
We at UNCTAD have started a program where we are engaging the officials, the technical officers of the country members of ECOWAS, building their negotiating capacity, like we have done a lot for Eastern and Central Africa, COMESA and EAC. What we do is show them the options and their implications. So that if you're making offers, particularly services offers, if you are making acceptance or on similar tariff structures, for example, 3-band structures we have in EAC and COMESA, what does it imply? And then they assess the cost. We can also assist to assess the potential cost and what remedial actions you can take if there's a surge of imports that are destroying our industry. We help build that capacity so that they talk at the same level. And we hope that by that we are going to contribute to how West African, the ECOWAS countries can lock in with the tripartite and cover the largest area of Africa as an important step towards the CFTA.
Right. One last question for you very quickly. I know you've called for parallel monitoring process to essentially see exactly how the CFTA is going to be built up. What's the status of that process so far?
Again, it's at the level of capacity building in a lot of the areas because they have never tried it. And we're just basically strengthening the ability of officers first to understand what it implies, but secondly, to have the competence of applying it. And we're still in the initial phase, but we expect, since it has worked in some of the smaller integrations, it is going to work as Africa 6. The critical importance of creating an African mega-regional trading bloc.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Mohiseke Kitui, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.